favorite president. I'm a big fan. I am a really big fan of you people that you do this. I don't know, but I just want you to be safe. You're talented people, and you're great people and great Americans. Have a good day. Have a lot of fun, and I'll see you later.
Today, as a sports fan, pretty remarkable. Donald Trump, golf with Tiger Woods, the Super Bowl, now Daytona 500. I don't know what's on the calendar for next weekend, but I will have to look at the sports calendar.
It's the Cornhole Championship. Yeah, he's going to that.
From Mar-a-Lago. I'm no doubt now, right? They know what to do.
Right.
Happy President's Day for those who didn't see it in the day book. Mark is on assignment today. We will get to that. So buckle up. Sean and I are gonna host this.
A few changes in stock. Well, you'll notice some subtle changes. That I mean, I'm sure Mark will be fine with that tomorrow. But if his box will be smaller then too. We made that decision earlier.
Yeah. And for those who are wondering, I'm not in jail. I am in a hotel room though. So, and not Versailles anymore as I was on Friday. So we will just quickly run through the day book here. Before we do, Sean, how was your weekend? Your holiday weekend?
My holiday weekend, I went to Idaho to speak. First time ever. Unbelievable, gorgeous place out there, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. I realized how difficult, why people don't go there more often, though. It's not that it's not gorgeous and great people. Man, does that take a lot of time. Flew out early Saturday morning, got there, gave a speech, got up at 3 a.m., took a car to Spokane, a flight to DFW. The flight from DFW to DCA ended up in Philly, took a cab to the train station, a 2-hour delayed Amtrak home, and an Uber, and got home at 9:30 p.m. So it was long.
Well, thank you for your service. You are here today. Well, I was with people in Miami where it was the boat show this weekend, the largest event in South Florida. So I was with a lot of America down here. We were not at the boat show, but traffic was everywhere. Just kicking off the day book here, it is a federal holiday. Donald Trump has no public events scheduled at this time. Sean, will we hear from Donald Trump today? You taking the over?
No, I'm going to take the under. He'll play golf. I'm sure he will. Hear from him is relative. See from him different. He will truth something. There was no question about that. So we will hear from him in some fashion. But I don't expect, I mean, aside from like sightings at the club, I doubt it.
Right. Okay. JD Vance, also no public events scheduled, perhaps jet lag. He's getting turned back around on East Coast time. Congress, the House is not in session this week. It's a district work period. The Senate will be back in session starting tomorrow. They have a busy schedule coming up, which we will get to later in the week. And we did not put it in the day book, but people are probably aware today in Saudi Arabia, Secretary Rubio, the national security advisor, the president's favorite friend, Steve Witkoff, will start negotiations with their Russian counterparts. And that is kind of a good segue here. Our first topic, meet me in Saudi Arabia or Paris. There's a question here, Sean, obviously the Ukrainians are not in Saudi Arabia. The Europeans are gathering in Paris to discuss kind of everything that happened this past weekend. So let me turn it over to you. Is Trump kind of winning the war with Europe, even though there's questions about what's happening in Ukraine?
Yeah, there's two separate issues that are happening, but on parallel tracks. So when it comes to Ukraine, this is where I think people are missing where the ball should be. Ultimately, we all want the war in Ukraine to end. We want people to stop dying, property stop being destroyed, money being spent on needless killing. So everyone gets their panties in a wad about the process. Oh, who's involved? At the end of the day, Zelensky said the other day, he told Trump, Putin fears you. He's the only one that can cut a deal. You're the only one who can cut a deal with him. And then everyone gets offended that they go off to start to cut the deal. Should Ukraine be involved at the end of the day? Of course, they have to be. They can't not be part of an ultimate solution. But for the U.S. to take the lead on this, considering the money that we're spending and the stature that we have, who cares? That shouldn't be what the focus is. So I think you're seeing this progress being made initially with Rubio and others over there in Saudi. President will then eventually meet with Putin at some point. Zelensky's going to be involved in the ultimate solution. And then the second piece is these that was led by the JD Vance speech in Munich on Friday, where everyone got all offended by the language that JD used and the assertiveness. Look, the way I look at this is two friends. At some point, if your friend keeps taking advantage of you, you should call it out because they're not much of a friend. And Europe for a long time has taken advantage of us financially, militarily, economically. And for us to finally call them on the carpet and say, you guys, we've been your friend, we've had your back, and we've asked you to make some commitments to your own neighborhood that you failed to do, is not rude. That's how you actually act among friends. So I actually think it's well timed that we called them out for how they've treated the United States and the support that we've given them. So I'm happy with where we're going. I think that we could see some great things, and people need to stay focused on what the ultimate prize is. Number one, ending the war in Ukraine. Number two is making sure that we have a stronger and better relationship with Europe. Them being stronger, them contributing to their national defense makes us better, it makes them better, and it makes the world safer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, as kind of shocking as Vance's comments were, and some of it was probably not the most ideal way to go to another country and just kind of lecture them the way he did. The irony is their reaction, Europe's reaction, is to huddle and talk about how we have to take ownership of the continent. We have to take ownership of the future, which, as you say, is exactly what Trump has run on, which is exactly probably a little bit of the reset that needs to happen, where it is not the United States, providing and paying for 80% of the security, but they start taking the majority share of their own neighborhood. And so I think it is fascinating. But to your point, it is a little concerning that they are having a peace negotiation without Ukraine in Saudi Arabia. I mean,
but we'll get to that. I mean, we're not putting a final deal on the table.
Well, I know, but you would think, I mean, look, I believe that we are coming to this on behalf of the Ukrainians. You'd want the Ukrainians to be with us. I mean, so hopefully, we'll see here. If this is going to become shuttle diplomacy, where our team goes from Saudi Arabia up to, Ukraine and back, we'll give it some time. But I think certainly it is concerning. To your second point here, I mean, obviously the reaction to Vance's comments have been pretty, striking. And it's not just what the Europeans had to say, but even, how certain parts of our own media have covered it.
Oh, yeah. Chuck Todd had a meltdown. But Dan, the thing is, we get lectured by them all the time. And then we get taken advantage of them all the time. And if for some reason for us to basically call it out is rude. I mean, at some point, this fluffy diplomacy and nicey nice talk goes so far. But this is like the DOGE of foreign policy. At some point, the waste has gotten so bad, it's time to call it out.
Well, look, one, the Europeans have done some stuff for us. A lot of Europeans fought in Afghanistan. I mean, it is not true that it's a one-way street.
Right. No. Well, I didn't say they didn't do anything.
Well, I mean, but the second point is, and I did see this over the weekend, it would be the equivalent of if a European head of state or a member country came and gave a joint address to, let's say, the Republican Congress and said, your DEI policies aren't strong enough. And you guys, the reason you guys are in the minority is that, you guys are not progressive. And I mean, people would basically say, get the what out of our country. So, I mean, I hear you that to me, it was almost like MAGA goes to Europe. I mean, it was right.
No, you heard right.
Right. Which is consistent with, Trump's foreign policy. But I think, as is often the case, it's a little bit of the how. And it could be that history will show that the only way to get them to sit up straight is,
But the funny part about this is the EU president goes out and says, we're now going to strive for 3% GDP commitment. I mean, with respect to NATO. And I'm like, that wouldn't happen without Donald Trump. Most of them don't hit 2. And the point is, this isn't them contributing to their own national defense doesn't benefit us. It benefits them. They become stronger. It benefits us in the sense that they're not as reliant as us. Every time they have a problem, they have to call us. It actually makes them stronger and it makes the world safer. So some tough love sometimes is needed. They love the talk. They love to lecture us. And once in a while, it's important to remind them of their own commitments.
Yeah. And I think one interesting thing is the Democrats who were at that conference, Mark Warner, Richard Blumenthal, Chris Coons, their comments were interesting. they raised questions like, we're concerned about the future of the election, but nobody attacked Vance directly, which, to your point, politically, it is popular in this country to say Europe needs to own more of its future. Europe needs to pay for more of its own security. You did not see any Democrats attacking those principles, which is, telling about the ground of our argument.
There's an arc that I see forming, right, among Democrats' response. So with DOGE and foreign policy, to your last point, they keep saying, well, yeah, you're kind of right. Like, you saw that with DOGE. It's like, we should have called this out. We can do this. And with foreign policy, yeah, Europe can do more. And to me, the overall point is, but you didn't, right? You guys had the opportunities. And I get it. This is, I said this to someone the other day, and I know this is a little tongue in cheek, but this is, when you're a kid, at some point your mom comes in and says, clean your room, clean your room, clean your room. And I don't know about you, but at some point she comes into me and says, if you don't clean your room, I'm just going to throw everything out. And it kind of gets the wake up call to say, get serious. You're not taking, and I think we've given people an opportunity, clean up the government, get rid of waste, start making Europe do more, et cetera, on all these issues. And at some point you say, all right, guys, you're not going to do it. We'll do it for you.
Yeah, it's often, look, Democrats are focusing a lot more on the how and not the what, and whereas the public tends to only care about the what. So let's now talk about the media. Sean, I'm going to put this on a T for you here. Let's play clip number 2, how the media has reacted to J.D. Vance's comments, and our friends at CBS have really stepped in it.
Well, he was standing in a country where free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide. And he met with the head of a political party that has far-right views and some historic ties to extreme groups. The context of that was changing the tone of it. And that the censorship was specifically about the right.
No, I have to disagree with you. Free speech was not used to conduct a genocide. The genocide was conducted by an authoritarian Nazi regime that happened to also be genocidal because they hated Jews and they hated minorities and they hated those that they had a list of people they hated, but primarily the Jews. There was no free speech in Nazi Germany. There was none. There was also no opposition in Nazi Germany. They were a sole and only party that governed that country. So that's not an accurate reflection of history. I also think it's wrong. Again, I go back to the point of his speech. Okay, the point of his speech was basically that there is an erosion in free speech and intolerance for opposing points of view within Europe, and that's of concern because that is eroding. That's not an erosion of your military capabilities. That's not an erosion of your economic standing. That's an erosion of the actual values that bind us together in this transatlantic union that everybody talks about. And I think allies and friends and partners that have worked together now for 80 years should be able to speak frankly to one another in open forums without being offended, insulted, or upset. And I spoke to foreign ministers from multiple countries throughout Europe. Many of them probably didn't like the speech or didn't agree with it, but they were continuing to engage with us on all sorts of issues that unite us. So again, at the end of the day, I think that people give that is a forum in which you're supposed to be inviting people to give speeches, not basically a chorus where everyone is saying the exact same thing. That's not always going to be the case when it's a collection of democracies where leaders have the right and the privilege to speak their minds in forums such as these.
Mr. Secretary, I'm told that we are out of time.
Just talked about, which is they're focusing on how he got their attention and not really the what, because obviously some of what J.D. Vance, her criticism is similar to what you heard of Trump in 2015 and 2016. This is far right. This is extreme. It shouldn't be given oxygen, but it turned out there were a lot of Americans who saw it very differently and were less kind of focused on Trump's style and more focused on the issues that he was raising. And now, they are primarily mainstream. So, Sean, what say you of Margaret Brennan and the way some of the media has reacted to J.D. Vance's speech?
Yeah. So 4 quick points. One, I thought Marco Rubio continues to demonstrate how eminently qualified he is for this position and what a great pick he was. He is articulate, well-versed in history. I couldn't be more pleased with President Trump's choice on this. 2, there's a broader discussion to be had on the issue of free speech. I've always said this before, free speech in its ultimate form is allowing that which you detest. I've used the example before. I find flag burning the ultimate disgusting act. But if you embrace the First Amendment and free speech, you have to allow what you hate. You have to defend that. That is the ultimate goal of free speech. Number 3, CBS is at best in a spiral downward of epic proportions. This comment by Margaret Brennan follows on the heels of 60 Minutes, the lawsuit, them discussing and suppressing free speech in a separate segment. They've had some issues with their morning show. They've covered how they've covered Israel. I mean, so that's number 3. Number 4, with respect to what Margaret Brennan said, she said that free speech weaponized was what allowed the Holocaust to exist. You know, Dan, when I was at the White House, I had probably one of the most epic screw-ups in my life. And in an attempt to explain something unbelievably poorly, I made a reference that I'll never, ever live down. And it was a fumble. Like, it was the biggest screw-up, like just how I articulated and what I was intending to do. I think everybody understood what I was intending to do to describe the horrendous nature of what Assad had done in Syria. And I screwed up an analogy and a historical reference. And I paid an ultimate price for this. And to watch Margaret Brennan walk out last night and not say a word, she goes, "We're out of time." CBS has said nothing. Her colleagues at CBS have said nothing. No one is calling her out. These so-called, Anti-Defamation League, the Southern Poverty, who are rushed to condemn everybody on the right. Where are they today? Why is Margaret Brennan facing no backlash from her colleagues in the media? This is absolutely reprehensible. The hypocrisy in the media continues to go unchecked. Caitlin Collins over the weekend tweets out the legal defense fund of Luigi Mangione, the guy who killed the CEO of United Healthcare. No matter what you think of this, raising money for a killer. And no one at CNN saying a word. I mean, whether it's Margaret Brennan or CBS or Caitlin Collins at CNN, the impunity to which these folks go out there and do things that are unbelievably reprehensible with no consequence is gone too far.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'll just say, because I see it in the chat, some people are like, how could we defend what JD Vance did? Look, I think, as is often the case with stuff, political parties have their fringes and they have people that say certain things. I don't think anyone, Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, is speaking on behalf of people who deny the Holocaust. I think what JD Vance was trying to do was say, look, some of the parties that you label as fringe, that you are trying to shut down, some of the issues that they are speaking to remind JD Vance and others a lot of what the right went through in America, which is immigration and people crossing their borders and the stagnant economy. And so when what they focused on is that some of the parties that he met with, some of what they've had to say is not, makes you cringe. But I think the bigger picture was, it was kind of this, the MAGA, principles they're now starting to push in Europe and saying, you need to, we are going to give voice to the frustrations of these people. And I think it does kind of go to this question of this emerging Trump foreign policy, which is, on the one hand, if you want our help, you're going to give us something. And if you don't have anything of note, to give us, like in Ukraine, they said, okay, we want half the minerals. It's a little, it's jarring. I read one analogy that said this is a little bit like colonialism, where it's like, we're going to take some stuff from you because we're helping you out. Look, Sean, to me, the issue is, at some point, we have to do favors for friends. Like, you can only have a deal if it's a two-way deal. The other side has got to get something out of the relationship. My dating history, like, good luck telling your partner it's always going to be the way I want it, my way or the highway. At some point, Trump's going to have to show some openness to, like, let us do you some solids here. But
Dan, you admit there's a difference. This is my point on two fronts. One is, like, the free speech argument. You're absolutely right. For those of us on the right, like, this idea of democracy dies in darkness, which is the new tagline of the Washington Post since Trump got elected. is an attempt to embrace the freedom of speech. And yet to people on the left, freedom of speech and freedom of the press and freedom of is what we want to talk about. So the idea of, the censorship and blocking people, like, that's not free speech. And this idea of saying, look, you've got to allow voices that you don't like. There was a comment one of the members of Congress, I played it on my show, from, I'm trying to remember what state she's from. And she said, I'll stand with anyone who wants to limit free speech. And it's like, wait a second. So there's a bigger, broader discussion, not just here in this country, but internationally, especially in Europe, about some of the laws. And if you saw, like, there was a clip that's now gone viral on 60 Minutes, I'll play tonight on the show, where these guys talk about the fact in Europe, insulting someone is grounds for jailing them, right? And so insulting them. Listen, if that was the case, half of America would go to jail for what they've said about me. But so there's a discussion about free speech. Then secondly, there's a discussion about how we conduct ourselves. And I think at some point, and I get your point, doing a solid for someone, whether it's a neighbor figuratively or a neighbor to like our north or whatever, is one thing. Getting taken advantage of or not looking for a good deal is quite another. And I think what Trump represents most broadly, both domestically and internationally, is a voice that says at some point, you've got to wake up and fix your own. You can't just do the same thing over and over again and expect a different outcome. So we're going to start looking out for America.
Yeah. Well, and I'll just say on the free speach that it's a little rich with the AP fight, but we need to move on. So
no. And I think that's, but I will say this. I will give you the fact that is worth a discussion. And I would tell you guys, this is Mike Allen in Axios today has a column that specifically devoted to the AP and the situation that they're going in, and lays out the arguments of both sides in terms of what's happening. And so since I don't think we're going to have time to get into it, but there is a compelling discussion about what's happening. And just because you don't allow someone into your office doesn't mean you're anti-free speech. I'll just leave it at that.
So we're going to move on now. There's a lot of talk about precedents, about what Trump is doing. He continues to move 100 miles an hour. DOGE, the firing of different federal agency employees. In some instances now they're quickly rehiring people because they seem to, realize, oops, wait, we do need that person. But the Supreme Court agreed now, or a case has reached the Supreme Court on the president's power to fire the I think it's the Inspector General, kind of writ large. Obviously, Sean, there's your case of Spicer versus Biden and the Kennedy Center. Stepping out from each of these, the bigger picture here, the power, the executive branch power to kind of police itself. How do you see this?
Well, first, on the court front, I can't imagine. Look, there's a nuance in the inspector generals in particular. They're supposed to be given 30 days notice and have a material reason for firing them and notify Congress. So I could see in that case the court kind of trying to carve out a niche that says the president has the power to do that. But in this particular case, they might find some nuance that says, but he didn't follow the procedure. So we're saying that the president can do it. He needs to go back, give them 30 days notice, and tell Congress he's firing. I could see a scenario where the court affirms that position. But the bottom line is, and I think Elon said this really well in the Oval the other day, at some point we elect the head of the executive, the presidency. The bureaucracy doesn't get to dictate what happens. We have an election, consequences happen. And if the president of the United States gets to shape the executive, that's just a fact, right? It's sort of like saying the Speaker of the House can't determine what bills come up on the floor of the House. You elect a speaker to perform certain functions, same way you elect a president to run the executive branch. So I have a feeling the court is going to affirm this, and that will go that. You mentioned the case. It was a really funny story. I wrote this op-ed. I mentioned this, a few weeks ago in the New York Post about Spicer v. Biden and why President Trump had all this power. And then this just tells you how funny this stuff is. In the course of the editing process, the New York Post editor says to me, what other commissions are there that this would like, because maybe not everyone's familiar with the Service Academy. And so I have a list of all the commissions and boards, and I start reading off a list like, oh, there's this. And they mention, oh, the Kennedy Center. Everyone knows what that is. So I put that in the op-ed. Well, then when President Trump fires everyone at the Kennedy Center, the Kennedy Center is asked, why are you not pushing back? And they say, on the record, because of Spicer v. Biden. Well, the reporter then from the Washington Post calls me and goes, do you realize that people are now citing your case as a reason why the President Trump has the authority to fire them? And I was like, no kidding. The Post reporter says, you didn't know that? And I'm like, it's not like I follow the Kennedy Center spokesman on Twitter or something. So he goes, oh my God, like he reads the course, I mean, the court stuff. He calls me back the next day and he said, you do realize how big this is. And we're now writing it. So that precipitated that story that was on the front page of the style section on Saturday. But it's the thing that I found funny, Dan, and I normally don't do this, but I kind of wanted to, I was on a plane long enough that I wanted to, like, it's the equivalent of, what do they call it? Hate watching, but I hate read the comments. And all these people are like, this was so petty. Like what, first of all, what was petty? I didn't do this. Biden fired me. All I did was, go to court to say he didn't have the right to do that. The Biden administration argued in court through the appeals process that they had the absolute right to do this. And now everyone gets pissed that President Trump is using that as the precedent to do this. It would have never happened if Biden hadn't been as petty as he had. So I see this over and over again where everyone gets mad that President Trump is doing something when Biden started it. Like they're like, oh, he took away Biden's security clearance. Yeah, Biden did it to him. You can't get pissed at him for what he started.
Well, and that's, I think, the thing that I would just, highlight is what seems to be kind of we're inching toward is for the last 30 years, chief executive officers, the president, have increasingly been arguing that congressional restraints on how the executive branch kind of governs itself, how it polices and oversees itself. There are no constraints, right? It would be like the executive branch telling Congress, these are the rules for how you have to operate and how you can fire your own employees. And it seems to be that increasingly the courts are of, agreement. And we'll see with this.
Well, there's two issues here, right? There's the legal point that you're talking about. Do they have the right to do it? And then in some of these cases, like the Kennedy Center, it's the tradition, right? I don't know that anyone would have argued that the president can't appoint certain people. But what Biden did was twofold. One, he broke tradition. No one had ever been fired before this. If you read the story, they fired me on September 1st, 2021, and my term ended November 1st. Yeah. I mean, it was
they just wanted to fire you. Yeah.
They did. Yeah. It was sort of like, so, which that's fine. Okay. We went to court. He has the right to do it. I accept the court's ruling. And I love the court's ruling for that matter.
But then you can't
difference
complain
between the tradition and the legal. But the problem that I find is so funny is that the answer keeps, and this is where the right, and this is where the right, I'm so glad that President Trump is standing up. For so long, the answer was the left's going to punch you. And then your answer is, okay, look the other way when we got back in power. That was what we were always told. We're bigger, we're better, we don't. But at some point, this gets back to the message arc that I was talking about. Why are we the ones that always have to turn the other cheek? At some point, we need to stand up on the right and do our thing. And I'm proud that President Trump is doing this.
It's so funny because on the left, they always see it the same way. The right punches and we get walked over. And so, but I think we both agree. Both parties continue to set precedents. And then when the other does it, it's like, oh my God. So let's move on here. There were a bunch of stories here over the weekend. And as we head into this week about our cracks starting to emerge in DOGE. First off, Sean, it is stunning. Donald Trump and Elon Musk sat with Sean Hannity. I think it was on Friday or Saturday. It's going to air tomorrow night. I think it's the third time they've been together to kind of defend DOGE. The president's most valuable commodity is his time. They are, doing this again. What are your, my sense is they're very smart politically. I wonder if they're seeing stuff in their own data that says we need to get ahead of this, try to, put a towel on some flames that might be building. There's this, over the weekend, several Republican senators and House members began to complain to their local press about the potential impacts of cuts and layoffs and services being frozen and uncertainty to local businesses. Now you saw the Wall Street Journal has this poll out. There's kind of not poll, but it's a check-in with a bunch of voters who swung to Trump in 2024, expressing concern about local impacts of things DOGE are doing. Sean, do you see some, cracks beginning to emerge, or you think it's still full steam ahead on the right?
No, it's quite the opposite. I mean, I think that people want cracks to emerge. So let's just be clear that everyone's sort of like, it's like a couple that a bunch of the guys don't think that the girl is good for the guy, or the girl thinks that all of her friends think the guy, and they're like trying to point out all the flaws. But everyone, because you look at the media, right? And they're like President Elon, Prime Minister Musk, and they want Trump to get pissed. The difference is they I think are simpatico. And that's why they did the interview. Look, Trump doesn't need a poll or whatever. He knows what's working. And I think he relishes this for many of the reasons we've discussed in the past, which is that Elon gets to be the foil. I mean, he's the bad guy. No, they're like, look at what Elon Musk is doing. He's carrying the load of all the bad. And I think Trump loves it. The base couldn't be more excited about what's happening. Trump's hearing that and seeing that. So look, I think the exact opposite. I think the media and the left really are trying to drive a wedge between the two. But when you saw that sit down with Sean Hannity, it was like, going back to my couple thing, it was like, you know what? We just need to hold hands and go show everyone that we're in love. I mean, it was.
Boy, because I don't remember, Trump sitting with someone like Hannity, with
right.
somebody else like that is in it. Because
that's what I'm saying.
Again, he is really sharing the stage. So it'll be interesting. Look, from the Democratic vantage point, I do find it interesting that more and more Republicans are stepping forward to say, we've got concerns. Like the fact that they're firing people, then rehiring people, that they're like, oops, wait.
But don't you think you have to? Like, I always think what they're doing now is like, after a storm, you worked for a bunch of members of Congress. That, like, after a storm, your boss sends a letter to FEMA as if like they didn't know that the storm came through, but they need to show action, right? Like I wrote a letter to the FEMA administrator about the damage in our district, right? They want to show their constituents. So by speaking out a little, it's telling their constituents, we're keeping our eye on this. We're aware of the problem. But at the end of the day, these guys are, the ones that I've talked to, they're super excited that we're finally addressing this.
Yep. Well, we'll do one more topic, then we'll get to your questions here. So, from my vantage point this weekend, there was kind of good news and frankly, a lot of bad news for Democrats. I'll start with the positive here as it's Monday. For those who haven't seen it, the Wall Street Journal, did follow up with these voters. And it was the first time that you saw some potential concern with the coalition that got Trump elected. I always come back to elections are decided with that 5 to 10% of the middle of the electorate. And primarily that group voted for Trump based on the economy, that inflation was a killer for them. The economy in general was not great. They want him to deal with immigration. They want the woke issues dealt with, which I think Trump is really doing. But those first two issues, there is less kind of there so far. And in this Wall Street Journal story, you have voters expressing real concern about kind of the speed that Trump is moving. They feel like some things are maybe falling through the cracks. His attention is not exactly on what they would like it to be. It reminds me for Democrats, we've counseled like, hey, this is only the first few weeks of the game here. Is a long way to go. Historically, when people move fast and do a lot, the country recoils a little bit, whether it was Obamacare, like big things. We don't tend to like big things too quickly. So I think there are some good signs for Democrats that voters seem to have that middle 10%, some real anxiety. The bad, and then Sean, I'll turn it over to you. Stories about Democratic fundraising. I know I mentioned this on X. Mark has really been talking about this. I poo-pooed it, at the time. One thing I did not think about was the fear of revenge and retribution by the Trump administration, kind of freezing major donors, like to the soft money groups, the people who write $5, $10, $15, $20 million, worried that they're going to have, investigators or auditors showing up at their door to just do a, personal or corporate audit. And just, what this means for Democrats if they don't have the institutional infrastructure being funded. And then just this story about something we've talked about, the way that the right is running circles around the left on social media. If you look at our leadership, as a rule, they are, you don't look at Nancy Pelosi and think nimble on social media. Chuck Schumer, you wonder if he even knows how to really do it himself or if his aides are doing it,
Wait, do you wonder?
Yes,
you don't wonder.
No, we don't.
And you don't wonder.
And so, just the fact that the Democratic leadership is just so missing in action and the echo chamber, part of the reason we don't have it is the leaders don't help to build it up because they're not really themselves on these platforms. Their staff is, in their accounts. But Sean, what is your, take on some of this stuff about the Democrats that's appeared?
First of all, you're crushing it on the topics. I'm like, I'm literally haven't taken this many notes in several shows. So kudos to your moderation here. I'll start with fundraising. I think the take that I found very fascinating in the story is that one of the way that I think we discussed it in the past primarily was, does the right attempt to use its power to basically say to folks, to corporations and others, do not donate, right? Do not go there. To quote Kamala Harris, don't. The difference that I thought was interesting in that story, Dan, was that it was them self-regulating themselves. People on the right, on the left saying, I don't want to give because I'll get seen as somebody who's supporting, like they're self-doing it to themselves. They're not saying I was told by some right-wing organization or by my member of Congress, don't give because I'll never get anything. They're self-policing and saying, I don't want to give because I don't want to out myself as a donor, because I don't want to face anything. And I think that that's a really unique angle to this. On the social media front, I can't believe how, if you go back through history, the Democrats generally lead in an area like low dollar fundraising, and then the Republicans take like a decade, and then somehow, it takes off. Social media, Democrats back in the early 90s embraced it a lot quicker, and I think there was this concern. If you think about even Section 230 and some of the other stuff that came out, it was the Republicans were fearful that Democrats are going to take it over. And I still think infrastructure-wise they do. When you look at the backbone of AI and a lot of stuff that comes out of Silicon Valley, it's garbage in from the left. And that's why you test this Alexa or whatever, and it doesn't know who the president is now. But I will say that how the Trump administration, the right, has handled social media has been brilliant. I mean, you look at the behind the scenes, Margot Martin, if you don't follow her on Instagram, the idea that you get to see the behind the scenes, Dan Scavino showing you the inside and out of the Oval Office. People aren't wondering about their president anymore. They're seeing behind the scenes footage. And the team over there is doing an absolute phenomenal job, not just on the social media front, but also on the digital front. There's some folks who worked with me in my term that came back to really get it. The way they're handling the website and pushing out information, phenomenal. David, I see you in the chat. Margot Martin is a top aide to President Trump. My apologies for not being clear on that. And she is one of his top communicators, very close to him, and has great access. And so she puts a lot of this behind the scenes footage out there so you can see some of these interactions. But I would just say like that to me is sort of, some point will be a college course on how they did this. The last thing I'll just say on inflation is you're right. Like the polling that has come out show that it still is a top issue. But we all know that, like, you just take the issue of eggs, for example. It's tied to avian bird flu and some issues with chickens. And so the reason I say that is that when you're the president, it's not like you just come in and go, okay, inflation back down. Like it's a much bigger thing. And what I think this president is doing well is there are certain policies that you can put into place that will start to stem it, or stop doing certain things. Like I think a lot of us on the right believe that inflation, government spending helps drive inflation. And so if you're starting to take down that, you hopefully will reap the benefits in a few months. That being said, I think what this administration has done is basically shown you, I've got 80,000 things on my to-do list. It's not that we're not there. Like they're doing so much stuff and they're always active that you can't say they're not doing anything. It's just that it's almost like a distraction. We're doing
and I think that's the problem, right? Which is I agree with you. No one expects him to bring prices down within the first 30 days. By May or June, I think the issue is they are doing so much. Like DOGE is front and center. The wars are front and center, right? But he did not get elected because of DOGE. And
but that the difference with Biden is that you never saw him, and then he was.
Well, I agree. Yeah.
But my point is, I'm just trying to draw the contrast here, which is you never saw him, and so he'd come out once in a while and put out a statement saying we're working on inflation. You'd say like, what are you doing? What are you doing? With Trump, they're doing something every day, 24/7. And so you're like, I know you're working hard, but can you get to that?
And that's going to be the key, because if come June, the economy is not getting better and prices are not coming down, there is going to be this, you're doing a million things, but the things that not the things we got you were like,
right. But the reality is they know they can't, there's not a lot they can do in the short term. So there's a lot of things that are happening behind the scenes to try to deal with this. But you're right. In 8 months, I mean, I'd say midsummer, if you're traveling and things are costing more as you're trying to go take a vacation or a day off or whatever. Yeah, I think, and they know that. They're not, I mean, you've got a really strong team there that knows that.
All right. Well, we do. I think it's safe to say here that Mark's day job is safe because people are upset. We have not gotten to their questions. So with that here, Sean and I love to hear ourselves talk, and with no one policing us, we did it. All right. Let's go to David Fletcher. David, come on in, unmute. Hello. Yep. Oh, you know what? Who has the power? There it is. Go ahead, David. I think we should be able to hear you.
Hey, how you guys doing?
We're great.
Good.
How you doing?
Good, good. I was just wanting to comment on the the Face the Nation thing this week. I put this in the chat. I think Republicans are having a contest to go on Face the Nation and see who can make Margaret Brennan look stupider.
I mean, who's winning?
JD and Marco have a tie. I got to give the edge to Marco because what she said was just so. I don't even know if she's read a history book.
Can I ask you this, David?
The Nazis allowed too much free speech. Are you kidding me?
But can I ask you this? So let me, by Friday, does Margaret Brennan still have a job? Yes or no?
Yeah, sure.
You think so?
You think that the bosses that she has looked at that and go, "Oh, that's the worst thing I've ever heard." Nah,
I don't know, because their bosses are trying to get a merger done. I think they're a little more sensitive to what the Trump administration may think. Yeah, David, did you have a question? Do you have a comment, or do you just wanted to?
No, it was. I mean, you guys go on these shows, and you go into green rooms, and you've done all this stuff. I mean, have you ever seen? I mean, I hate to rag on her so much, but have you ever seen anybody like this? Because I haven't. I mean, you can go to the debate, you can go to JD Vance, you can go to several other things, and it just seems that she doesn't know what she's talking about. And that's a pretty.
There is a weekly competition between Margaret Brennan and Kristen Welker, who can be worse. And that's a tough one right now.
I think the big challenge is with the media, with the mainstream media, is they still tend to focus on the how and not on the what. What was the kind of macro message of JD Vance to Europe? Instead, she focused on his tactics and, was trying to kind of like express outrage, which is not what a journalist is supposed to do, right? You want to kind of go to the substance, try to educate people about, why this is important, why this is worth, being in the news, instead of focusing on kind of your own personal feelings on the style of how it's done. And that, has been tripping up the mainstream media for 9 years. They don't like Trump's style.
Yeah.
To state the obvious.
Yeah. No, but one thing, I think that Kristen Welker, I mean, I agree with you, Sean. She's not great, but I think that she at least knows what she's talking about. I mean, she's being willfully ignorant or whatever when she's talking to Republicans. I just don't get the feeling that Margaret Brennan knows anything.
Well, I think
I don't know that it's an intelligence thing as much as it is a bias thing. I mean, I think I think that she just really doesn't like in a personal way. I mean, the animus. So that's the thing. When you watch a show like that, you can see somebody's animus. I mean, she just doesn't like them, and it's just blatant on television.
That's true, because you watch her interview a Republican, and her hands are all over the place. She's doing this. she's like this it's just, and then she's interviewing a Democrat, like, who was it, Shaheen, yesterday, and she's just like sitting back going, yeah, well, that's amazing.
That's a good observation. Thank you, David. Thank you so much for joining. Patty, I'm going to mispronounce your last name. Patano? All right, well, first we have to unmute you, and then you can tell me I'm right or wrong. Let's see if you can. I'm not sure who has, without Mark, who has the power to unmute Patty?
Ready? I will try.
Yeah.
I think I did it. I think I
There
did
you
it.
go.
Hey,
All right.
thank you.
Hello, Patty. Oh, you just muted yourself. Right, Patty, you were unmuted and then you just muted.
Got it.
There you go.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I've been thinking about this for about a week. I've been trying to imagine what this past, if not even a month, would have been like if Kamala Harris and Walz were in office, and trying to picture what would be happening, what they'd be focusing on. And to me, the answer could be very revealing for Democrats if they really thought about it. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Boy, it's a great question. It would be different. I think this is something that I talked about during October. I don't know why Harris and Walz wanted to be president and vice president other than to stop Donald Trump. And would she be focused on she probably would be focused on some economic bill that would have included her, housing credit and the small business credit, which I would say, not to belittle them, but are relatively small things in the big picture. But I think, probably focused on the Israel conflict and Ukraine. But I don't know. I mean, and that's part of the problem for the party today. They don't know where they want to go. They don't know what, if we had power, what would we want to accomplish? Lord knows they're not going to run on undoing DOGE. Like, you're not going to say we're going to rehire federal employees and like put them all back. And I think the party's going to have to try to figure out what is it for, not just what is it against. And we've got a long way to go right now.
I was just going to say, Patty, and I don't mean to be, I'm saying this tongue in cheek, but life is short. I don't have enough time to think about what Kamala Harris would have done. And I think you're right. I'm being tongue in cheek here, not to be disrespectful, but I don't really care to me, it would have been something small ball. They would have been talking social issues. It just, to Dan's point, like, they didn't have a vision and it showed. And so,
And by the way, it'd be wild to see if JD Vance swears in Senator Tim Walz in 2 years. That would be if he does end up
running. The word
running.
I'm hearing is that I've asked a couple Minnesota Dem politicos who don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah,
so.
no, I just did be, Governor Harris, Senator Walz, who knows? Patty, do you have any other?
Well, I was just going to comment, when I think about it, the whole temperature and level of everything just is reduced, which to me is not a good feeling. It feels like there wouldn't be anything going forward, and maybe I'm just comparing it to what's happening now. So anyway,
well, a new administration, yeah, I mean, they would have had something, but I think it would have been relatively small, particularly because she was so uncomfortable criticizing Biden. So, I mean, it would have been weird to come in and be like, I'm going to completely throw cold water on those previous 4 years. So, yeah. Thank you, Pat, for joining. Anthony from France, bonjour.
Bonjour. That's all I know.
That's it. We're done. Are you in France or a France island or a French island or?
No. I'm actually living here in France. I'm not an American citizen, but I do love the show, and I think I discovered you on Megyn Kelly.
Okay.
And I do like to follow American news as well. So I just came on because I wanted to react, if that's okay, following JD Vance's visit here in Germany to the security meeting. because I know the press here in Europe in general, the pretty much like the liberal press in America, so they kind of already hate him before you even start saying anything. But I think there is a movement, and a lot of people in America are not, left wing in America don't realize that even here in France, for example, the electorate, I would say, is about 44% to the right. If you look at all the parties, and I think a lot of people in America, and that's my question to Dan eventually. I just see that it seems like the left is really struggling to come to terms with the new reality, right? Because, for example, here in Europe, you have a massive migration that have happened since to 2015. Remember with the war in Syria? I don't know if you remember that picture of that little boy who died. I think it was on a beach near Greece. It was
Yes.
horrific. And nobody is talking about the fact that even under the Obama administration, like the displacement of people and just the chaos that ensured that came because of that war. Germany took in 1 million people, and immediately they start having terrorist attacks. So I don't know whether the left actually realized what the impact of migration in Europe, or even in America for that matter. And I'm saying it as someone who's also himself eventually immigrated here in France. But you at some point, when you keep adding, and I see the same thing, for example, also in Chicago, you have places that are already struggling, and you keep adding people, the infrastructure is not there to support the growth. And sadly, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if the left, whether in America or in Europe, is ever going to self-correct. But it is going to be a problem,
No,
just
Anthony.
on the
Yeah.
infrastructure issue.
Look, I think you make a very smart point, and I know some people in the chat here are kind of criticizing me for not being tougher on JD Vance. The reason that I'm a little more open-minded is the big picture. I agree with you. The Democratic Party completely missed the rising frustration over immigration, and that goes even into this summer when there was a famous MSNBC panel one evening where they basically tried to say that it was a joke that immigration was a top issue of voter concern and that it shouldn't be. And to state the obvious, there is no worse position in politics than telling a voter that what they think is basically stupid and shouldn't be what they think. Like, let me tell you what should be important to you. And I think in Europe, there is a similar kind of liberal sensibility that does not want to open the door that immigration is a problem. The working class has real concerns, whether it's cost of living or economic access or the strain on social services. And whatever I think, voters are increasingly with their feet making statements. And I think that's where JD Vance was like, you guys need to stop saying they're extreme and focusing on something else that they talk about. Germany obviously has laws about what you can and cannot say or advocate for regarding the Holocaust. That is a side issue, I think, is what Vance was saying. The big issue is you need to let these voices, don't fear them, right? Because it's on the march the way it was in the United States. So I think you're right. I think Democrats, need, and I think here we learn the lesson the old fashioned way. We got our butts kicked.
Yeah, and I think even, I remember, is it last year that there were this riot in Ireland? And
Yep.
and the main thing, I think the trigger was like, they also had, they took in a lot of people from Ukraine eventually. So I think a lot of people, if you speak to the elite, you only have the impression that those, like the entire country, the entire European country or the EU is fully behind Ukraine or the war in Ukraine, but it has caused so many problems, and I think the average everyday people realize that this thing cannot continue, it cannot go on. There are people today living in Germany following this, well, basically where they closed 3 nuclear power plants, and they had to go and find all the energy now in Russia. But there are people now in Germany, the largest economy in Europe, who are unable to heat their homes. And the situation is, it's really bad, and I think that the elites, sadly, I don't think that they understand the appetite that people have now to say, okay, we've done what we could, you've asked us to pay more taxes, we've done all of that, now we just want to move on. We don't want to hear this defense of Ukraine, because I mean, eventually, what are you going to ask them to continue funding it up to which point?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway.
Let me just make first.
Sean.
Yeah, no, yeah, I'll make it quick. Anthony, first of all, thank you for coming on and following the show, and appreciate your comments. I mean, one, if you ever think that if you are a believer that the American media is left wing, I think Anthony's pointing it out. I mean, the European press makes the left wing media look right wing. Number two, I think I appreciate your comments on immigration. There's this false choice that many in the left put out that somehow if you don't let everybody flood into your country, then it's not a humanitarian worldview, that you're not caring for people. I think that's just a false choice, that people can care about other people and with also supporting a rule of law, right? Every country needs to protect its borders and its people. And then the last thing I'll just say real quickly is you're absolutely right. I mean, at some point, focus on the basics, right? These governments have issues with taking care of essential services, and that they want to have these existential fights about DEI and wokeness and who's taking care of whatever. Focus on the essential necessities that a government's supposed to take care of for its people, protecting them, providing essential services, instead of trying to reshape. I mean, and that's the issue in Europe. They're sitting around having these discussions about free speech when they're not doing what they need to do at the most basic level.
Anthony, thank you so much. Thank you again for watching.
Guys.
So just a couple of housekeeping items here. One, if you miss Mark and you want more of us, of course, we are going to join Mark, who is co-hosting for Michael Smerconish on Sirius. We'll be on here in about 7 minutes, and Mark will be going to noon. A reminder, he will have his show tonight at 6 p.m. Sean, you are also at 6 p.m. What do you have in store for people tonight?
We've got a discussion we're going to talk a lot about this with the Chicks on the Right. Phenomenal discussion. And then, you know what, Dan, because of your earlier comments, my newsletter tomorrow at SeanSpicer.com is going to be on the AP style book and the issues at the White House. You inspired me, so it's free. You can go to SeanSpicer.com and sign up, but I'm going to write it from why this matters and what both sides are saying.
Awesome. And then we both love Meghan McCain. Many of you know her. For those who don't know, she is joining the Two-Way family, and she is going to kick off her new show, Meghan McCain Happy Hour, this Wednesday. Personally, she is so blunt and direct, but always laughing and a sense of humor. So no doubt it'll be great. 5 o'clock. It will not compete with Sean and Mark. So pencil it in. And then just lastly, on a personal note here, I'm going to try not to cry. Every morning when we log into this show, we are greeted by our production team. And one of the members of the team, Audra, got some really bad news on Thursday. She's going to have a real battle ahead of her. I'm trying not to cry more. But we just want you to know, Audra, we love you. You're like a mother to all of us on this show. No offense to the other women, you are as well. But like in my family, if something happens to a member of the family, you rally the troops and you do everything you can. So Audra, get well. We love you. And good luck with your battle.
Thank you, Dan, for doing that. I couldn't have gotten through that. So thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Mark will be back tomorrow, and he'll put us in our place, and it'll be a more efficient show. Thank you, guys.
Have a great President's Day.